Welcome everyone to episode 152 of the CEN Nutrition Podcast. You're with your hosts Bryan and Peter today. And on today's podcast, we're getting back to basics and showcasing our complete feed, which is the CEN Grain Free Ultimate. And this is the beginner's guide. So grab your pen and paper and you'll be able to write notes to get really familiar with this product that actually helps you save time, save money, and gets the results. So how are you, Peter?
Bryan, I'm very well. It sounds too good to be true. What's the catch here?
There's no catch, because what we're doing here is we're feeding according to the physiology of the horse and what they require inside.
Absolutely. Look, I've been good. I'm on a straight and narrow for a couple of weeks as well. We're having a detox, both myself and Bryan. We're saving our livers up for the Christmas party, I think.
It's going to be a long season. But yeah, actually, that's a very good plan, Pete. I think we all need that. Yeah, so when we look at how we feed our horses and what we're trying to do is simplify and have a reason for feeding, we thought we'd give this update in 2025 of our CEN Grain Free Ultimate, which is our complete feed. And this is suitable for all horses, especially the performance horse, but also that paddock ornament, depending on their condition, your aims for them, and it can be adjusted with the feeding rates.
Yeah, how this podcast has sort of come about is obviously we do the free diet consults and we get a lot of different questions, and there's a bit of a pattern there now that's forming about the questions being asked in terms of, do I only have to feed one hard feed? I don't need to add any magnesium into it. I don't need to add any calcium. So people are a little bit bamboozled, shocked, the simplicity of the actual feed, along with the program, obviously, that we'll mention later in this podcast. So it's probably time for a beginner's guide, where it's very hard to explain over the phone to one person at a time, where we thought if we did a podcast, we can pretty much give a summary for everyone to sort of get their head around. And then obviously you can contact us if you did want to go through the free diet consult with myself, Bryan, or Angelique, to crease out maybe any small creases that maybe they're in a diet that we don't cover in this podcast.
Yeah, this podcast is going to give you those clear steps, the exact quantities, although every horse is individual, so you still have to tweak it. So take this as a general guide, and how to track weekly the response this feed will give your horse. And as Pete said, this can be used to even send to your friends if they're looking to get onto the CEN Grain Free Ultimate as their feed, because we do get a lot of existing clients wanting to explain to their friends, but they're not just confident at doing it.
I think the biggest sort of red flag that we see in majority of the diets is that people have still got in their mind that they need to feed 3, 4, 5, 6 kilograms of a hard feed or multiple hard feeds. And we find that the hay really gets underutilized. So this time of the year, it's in Australia, it's spring, you get spring pasture coming through. All you're going to be doing is, if you're going to feed your horse 3 or 4 or 5 kilos of a hard feed, you're just taking up valuable space in that gut, and you're actually stopping it in a way, eating pasture or eating hay, which is going to be healthier most of the time, and it's going to be more cost effective for you as well.
Yeah, that's well said, Peter. When we look at a horse's diet, we should be utilizing your hay or pasture as that main calorie source, being 80 to 90% of the balance of the diet going in. And today we're going to show you how to build that diet that gets results without that sugar roller coaster that we don't want. And that's about simplifying it down to feeding the CEN Grain Free Ultimate as your foundation feed, because in one sentence, it's grain-free, low sugar, low starch, high fiber, and built on the faba bean hulls and kernels, and it's designed to complement the forage and not fight it, and according to the Australian conditions.
Yeah, that's well said, Bryan. It's to complement the forage, not fight it. And what we mean by that is we might do a pasture analysis or a hay analysis, or we've done hundreds that we can refer back on, and we know what's missing in that pasture. We know what's missing in that particular hay. And that's where that grain-free ultimate product is there to plug in the gaps of the minerals, the vitamins, or whatever may be missing in that particular roughage, where I think most other companies, they're interested in selling volumes of feed and not really taking the hay or pasture with, like really putting a microscope under it to actually see what may be missing and then trying to correct that nutritional deficiency.
Yeah, it's about that education of not feeding a horse like a human. So they're designed to graze constantly, and their stomach roughly empties every 30 to 90 minutes, and their stomach is only 8 to 15 litres, which is tiny compared to their big body. So overloading on that hard feed is not going with their natural digestive process whereas we trying to encourage that amount of roughage first and then the hard feed to balance it.
Yeah, and the hard feed obviously being grain-free. As Brian mentioned, we use the faba bean hulls and the kernels in a combination. So we're trying to get the digestible energy up, that we're trying to get the vitamins and minerals, but also not heat the horse. You know, we don't want to fizz the horse up so it's sort of going off its chops. It's, you know, the energy has to be a slow release energy. And look, 9.5 times out of 10, the feed rate of our product is a lot less than most of our competitors on the market.
Yeah, it's all designed around the hindgut. So having that high fiber, good digestible fiber in that CEN Grain Free Ultimate, it's actually got a higher digestibility than hay itself. So that's going to really complement the fiber sources going into the horse. So you need digestible fiber, you need indigestible fiber for that movement through the hindgut especially. Plus you get the added bonus of those micro-encapsulated live probiotics inside as well, and prebiotic that we include. So we're all trying to get that hindgut health right, because that's the majority of the digestion of calories for your horse.
Brian, for all the chaff feeders out there, obviously there's still a lot in Australia. Being, you know, so high in digestible fibre, correct me if I'm wrong, it would help obviously ease that burden of that person needing to feed chaff at the same time, because we have got a high fibre pellet.
Yeah, 100%. So you're not feeding the bucket loads of chaff that we used to once see around. So we still get diets that come in that are around 4 or 5 scoops of chaff. Really, some of this chaff that we see is a little bit like paper, and the nutritional value is not there, and it's really just an empty filler. Whereas when you feed the CEN Grain Free Ultimate, reduce that chaff right down to 200, 300 grams if you must feed it for texture or to encourage the feeding if you've got a fussy eater. But really, you can take out and eliminate the chaff and save money.
Yeah, look, some of the owners have been honest enough with me when I put them on the spot, and I do ask them point blank, is it to make you feel better or is it to make the horse feel better? And look, they'll admit sometimes it's them, and sometimes, you know, they think it does benefit the horse. But chaff is chopped up hay sold at X amount of the price. So it's not a natural long stem roughage as we try to promote on the podcast. So the benefits I don't see. It does, you know, it does fluff the feed. You know, if you use a lot of it, it will fill a 20-litre bucket. But the nutritional volume or even digestible energy in that chaff is nowhere near as high as what it is in our grain-free ultimate.
Yeah, that's 100%, Peter. And what we look at for horses, they are actually their natural chaff cutters when they cut up long strands of hay and that roughage source. So the studies show that they create 2 times more saliva when cutting up their own chaff with ingesting hay. So when you give them the hay or the pasture, their saliva production is double compared to chaff. So there's numerous benefits there for the gastric environment to help buffer the rising acid, and the saliva can be really seen as your natural ulcer preventative. So look at it that every time your horse chews, and the longer it chews, is their natural ulcer supplement without even giving them a supplement.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't think we're getting any Christmas cards from the chaff merchants this year.
No. So I think when we look at how we base our feeding rates for the CEN Grain Free Ultimate, what we have to do is to get back to, and we'll call this step 1, and it's a snapshot of your horse, looking at their weight, their workload, their forage intake, how they are temperament-wise, and see where they are at this point in time on another feed or the feed that you're going to transition off onto the CEN Grain Free Ultimate. The first thing we look at is, so adding up all your foundation of your roughage and then the existing hard feed, is that horse holding weight or condition with that amount of calories going in? And it might be a yes, it might be a no. And then from there, we can work out the calorie intake that's required when you switch over the CEN Grain Free Ultimate.
And also basing it around the roughage, as we said, you know, like if you've got really good, you know, spring pasture, you've got green grass, you may not need any hay. You know, we still get a lot of people feeding still ample hay, and, you know, they've got green pasture. And in some cases you may need both, but in a lot of cases you may not. So we look at what pasture you have. If you've had an analysis, if you know what type it is, we can look back on the hay analysis that we've done over the last 11 years to try to get a pasture or hay as close as to what you have. And that's, you know, at least that's a starting point, you know. So once you know what your pasture is, what your hay is, then we start working the diet around your pasture or around your hay, rather than going, well, you need to feed X amount of grain-free ultimate and don't worry what hay you're feeding or don't worry what pasture you're feeding. Because if we do it that way and then there's too much protein in your hay, if you're feeding a prime loose and you're going to be feeding 2 kilograms of our grain-free ultimate, you may have too much protein in a diet, and that's going to be evident in the symptoms that the horse will show.
Yeah, there's plenty of nutrients to balance up, and choosing the right hay type is really important, because when we look at the cereal hays, they might be up there with their sugar and starch, like around that 20-30%. As Peter mentioned, lucerne can't be used as the main roughage source. It can be used to spike the roughage source to bring up the protein. But what we're looking for is some of that Rhodes grass, or even the native grasses that are around. We've profiled heaps, and when we look at the way the protein to fiber, digestibility to sugar and starch levels, it's a lot more even, and it really lowers that insulin spike. It really helps the whole digestive tract work better, and is a more natural way of the horse foraging with this profile type.
Yeah, the devil is always in the detail. And look, I think the numbers are very important. Even though we don't have, exact numbers, and we know that each batch of hay is going to have varied numbers. You may get, a teff hay, you might go to a Rhodes hay, you might then go to an oaten hay, and then there's a wheaten hay, and then there's a barley hay. So it's really important to try to stick to a similar type of hay throughout the year if possible. The chopping and changing is, does knock the horses around a little bit. So every time you chop and change a hay from a different variety, and I mean, if you went from a teff hay to an oaten hay, well, then you've got to change the diet as well, because if you don't adjust the diet to the different hay type, then the horse obviously is not going to be getting the optimum results.
Yeah, and we can work with you. So when you don't have access to native pasture hay or meadow hay or Rhodes grass, and you've only got the cereal hays to choose from, give us a call, because we can really zero down and get that even balance of sugar and starch in particular going into your horse, limit those insulin spikes which affect the behavior and other metabolic issues, and we can easily adapt it with the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate.
Look, we can make the diet work around every hay. That's the beautiful thing. So I'm having a bit of success with the performance guys in Victoria, and look, they've had a pretty big drought. The oaten hay is readily available in Victoria, so people hear oaten hay, geez, it's high in sugar, and it is. It's between 20-22% water soluble carbohydrates. So on the surface, it's quite a bit. But when you add the Grain-Free Ultimate in at a particular feed rate for those performance guys, well, we balance out the sugar with good vitamins, good minerals. We bring the protein up. With some of them, we even ask them to add cracked lupins, because the oaten hay is only 8% protein. So for a horse that's getting trained every day and it's competing and it's performing, there's not enough protein in just the oaten hay, and it might be 2 kilograms of our Grain-Free Ultimate. So then that's where we add the cracked lupins into the diet to bring up the actual protein profile, to bring up the digestible energy that horse needs, because it's working 5, 6, 7 days a week, but also keeping the sugar and starch low, so it's not going to affect the behavior of the horse or try to prevent injuries as well.
Yeah, what Pete's outlined there is really perfect for the performance horse, because they're getting a good protein source from each part that he's mentioned, particularly the cracked lupins, because they're cheap and easy accessible, and you're not doubling up with your hard feed base, which is our favour bean. So you got the lupin bean as another source, and then say you're feeding some oaten hay, you're giving a biscuit of lucerne there, you're getting 4 sources of protein going into the horse, which means the protein quality is really high, because the amino acid profile of each one is really mixing in together to cover all bases, particularly for muscle growth.
Yeah, it's the various sources of amino acids from as Brian mentioned, the 2 or 3 or 4 different aspects, and it takes a bit of skill to balance that, because if you go too heavy on one and if you go under on another one, you're going to throw the whole diet out. So doing this for 11 years, sort of, soon to be 12 years, just around the corner, we've got the runs on the board with dealing with so many different scenarios, different roadblocks as well to, okay, well, this worked on that, this didn't. So we've sort of got the blueprint in a way of what works, what doesn't work. Yeah,
and just going back onto that profiling of the hays, you see oaten hay, it can have as little as 7-8% protein. We've seen some 12-13%. By looking at the hay you don't know, trying to get a test from the farm per batch, or even looking at getting your own testing. We get ours through Feed Central, which is a great resource. It's really important if you want to be serious with those performance horses in particular.
So, Brian, is there anything else we need to cover in step 1?
Yeah, I think we can reaffirm that there's a non-negotiable amount of roughage that needs to go into the horse. So we'll take this really quick and easy example. You have a 500 kg horse. needs a minimum of 1.5% of their body weight in roughage, so hay or pasture per day. What does that look like? That's around 7.5 kgs of hay or pasture per 24 hours. A good way to measure it if you're feeding hay is, so you get one of those luggage scale hooks that can go on a slow feeder hay net and pack your hay net in. And because hays can be all different densities just when they're cut and the moisture content, then you can get the exact amount. But really, a rule of thumb is just to keep it packed every day, pack it twice a day.
So what 1.5% looks like, it's for a 500 kilo horse, it's around about 7.5 to 8 kilos of hay or pasture in a 24-hour period, yeah?
Yeah. So, and that's about over 18 hours of pasture grazing as well. So if you do notice your horse not grazing as much, a good thing to do is substitute some of their grazing for an easier thing to graze, which is hay or to munch on, because there can be that water content in grasses too, so they're not getting that dry matter nutrient. So it just depends on how your horse thrives under those conditions. You have easy keepers that thrive easily off a pasture that's not too nutrient rich, and then you've got others that need that extra, say a grassy lucerne or something there that they need that extra amount of calories, because horses are firstly a hindgut fermenter. 70% of the energy in the forage-based diet comes from that hindgut, and that hindgut making those volatile fatty acids, and they're produced in there and they're used throughout the body. And even in performance or work, it's anything under that canter kind of exercise, so trot or even just walking around, that's what they're doing the majority of the time. So supporting that part of the energy system of the horse is really important, and that's why the roughage amount per day is very important.
Yeah, forage first, number second, yeah?
Yeah, that's so true, Pete. When you look at the stomach acid also, so that's in that first part of their digestive process where they break down all their nutrients or the food that's going in, that is secreting acid 24/7. Saliva buffers that acid and helps buffer that environment. So without that roughage going in continuously, you're just going to heighten the ulcer risk in your horse particularly.
And that's where the people that are feeding the high amounts of chaff, restrict that saliva production that you just mentioned, that needs to be there to help buffer that acid. So this is why we highly recommend that, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, if you do need to keep the chaff, even if it's for palatability, try to keep it to a double handful or something like that. That's not a high enough amount to cause any damage, and it may help that horse with the palatability.
Yeah, and one thing I looked into when you look at the physiology of the horse, when the horse chews saliva in a 24-hour period, it's producing around 20 to 30 litres of saliva. And guess how much acid per day the stomach produces in a horse? And it's around 20 to 30 litres. So looking at what Mother Nature did when they designed the horse, they're trying to give it that nice balance by chewing that long stem roughage to buffer that acid rising to saliva.
That's a lot of litres. Maybe that's what we need to drink at our Christmas party in Beer Brine. Be 20 and 30 litres.
I think we'll need to we'll have to book a hotel, so we won't be driving home. Yeah. Overall, when you look at what chewing does mentally as well, because that gut motility via the vagus nerve, it lowers stress hormones and keeps the gut flow constant. So what we're trying to do not only is support the horse's metabolic and digestive processes, its mental health or temperament improves when you give it all this roughage volume.
Yeah, so Brian's mentioned the vagus nerve, and I've covered this in a previous podcast too, that the vagus nerve is connected from the gut to the brain. And for every 10 impulses that are sent, 9 are sent from the gut to the brain, and only 1 is sent from the brain to the gut. So what that tells you is if you've got a horse that's, very antsy on the toe, has anxiety, looks around everywhere, just is not how it needs to be, that's more a gut issue. It's not a brain issue. So a lot of people will just reach out, as a reaction, or I'll add magnesium, or I'll add a calming supplement. They're trying to fix the brain that they're overlooking the gut. So having highly fermentable fiber obviously is a base, making sure you've got the right amount of roughage, as we're outlining today. So with those 9 impulses from the gut to the brain, it's paramount that we focus on that gut health.
Yeah, and also it fuels the brain and muscles, the slow release energy that comes from that forage fermentation. So those volatile fatty acids, as they're called, that's released in the hindgut, fueling all parts of the body. And as Pete said, brain health is really important. it can really have an effect on that temperament.
Especially if you've got a horse, if you're, it doesn't matter what performance you're in, but there's nothing worse than having a horse that's not concentrating, focusing. I wouldn't say almost doesn't want to be there, but that is something that we can try to fix with a balanced diet.
Yeah, no, 100%, Pete. So we'll get to the next step, and this is when we introduce the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate. So you have your roughage source, the hay or pasture, a big green tick, and let's look at not grabbing 20 different bags or going to the produce store and, oh yeah, this looks good. This is another balancer pellet that I need. So we're going to strip this all down and we're going to feed the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate at a feed rate that will support your goals with your horse.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, those feed rates may vary from half a kilo to 2 kilos to even some of our extreme performance horses, like in a harness industry or even in a thoroughbred industry, where some of them get up to 4 kilos of the grain-free ultimate as well.
Yeah, so the grain-free ultimate, it is a 100% grain-free, that low NSC. So what we're trying to do is we've got some sugar and starch in there, but it's a balanced amount. But we're not getting too low because you need your muscle glycogen replenishment in performance. But then also when you have a paddock ornament that needs to hold their condition, even around that half a kg to a kg, you're getting a very good vitamin mineral profile, especially the trace minerals, which are all chelated for better absorption. But you're just keeping that digestible energy per kg at a balanced amount that will help your horse's overall condition, whether they are in training or they're just having a spell.
Look, I think this week and last week we've had a few diet consults where with the spring grass, a lot of horses are putting on a lot of weight pretty rapidly. And a small concerning sort of pattern that we're seeing is people automatically think, well, they're feeding half a kilo of our grain-free ultimate or 750 grams, and yet the horse has put on 30 kilos. That's scientifically impossible. That's like me having a shot of vodka and being plastered, after one shot. I'd love for that to happen because it'll be a cheap night out.
It'll probably happen after this hiatus week.
Well said, right? Yeah. But what I'm saying is it's scientifically impossible for half a kilo of feed to put weight even on a 300 kilogram horse or a 400 kilogram horse, let alone a 500 kilogram horse. So what's putting that weight on that horse is the high sugar in the spring grass. It might be along with the hay that you've got. If it's, doesn't matter what hay it is. If it's a first season cut, it's always going to be higher in sugar than if it's a hay that's been shedded out there. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to make the mistake where you're going to drop, say, the feed to like 200 grams or 300 grams, which is not designed to be fed that low, because then you're not giving the horse the right amount of vitamins and minerals and everything that it needs to balance that high sugar pasture or the high sugar hay. On the flip side, we have got a concentrated version of the grain-free ultimate, which is our CF50 product, and that's a concentrated version of that grain-free ultimate, which is designed to be fed at 100 or 150 or 200 grams, and that's actually going to top up those vitamins and minerals if you didn't want to feed that higher amount. But as I said, half a kilo or a kilo, even with a high sugar pasture or hay, is still very safe.
Yeah, we've got the profile of this feed really nailed for the Australian conditions, because in your pasture and hay, you're higher in iron than the copper and zinc and manganese especially. So we're balancing that up in this pellet. But also when you look at, and we'll touch on salt down the track or later in this podcast, your pasture and hay has enough potassium. So it's actually high in potassium that we have profiled everywhere in Australia. So having that really even balance of vitamin minerals at a feed rate that's not over the top, that's not high in sugar and starch, is going to really help prevent those insulin spikes that cause like that hormonal stress for those sensitive horses, even tying up. But when you look at how a horse is designed, we're just meant to complement the roughage amount going in without, and not replacing that amount going in.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, even as an example, at a 1 kilogram feed rate, we have around about 900 milligrams of zinc and about 350 milligrams of copper. So compare that to most commercial feeds on the market. We've got 3 to 4 times more. So this is where, if you're feeding another feed and you're only giving half a kilo or a kilo of a feed that's got 4 times lower vitamins and minerals, you're actually shortchanging that particular horse. But you're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the other feed may be high in sugar and you don't want to feed your horse any more sugar. But because it's got low vitamins and minerals, you're forced to feed a higher amount that you don't want. So this is where this product is ideal, because you can get away with a lower feed rate, whether it's half a kilo or a kilo, depending on the weight of the horse. You're not going to be promoting sugar in the diet, which may already be present in your pasture or hay, but yet you're not shortchanging horse with the vitamins and minerals that it needs.
Yeah, and why are those trace minerals especially really important for your horse? Well, they're used in every part of their body. And just for an example, your hoof health relies on it, the skin and coat condition, even their colour, it's influenced by zinc and copper especially. Also their immune system, particularly zinc, used in many pathways. So shortchanging those vitamin minerals on a daily basis, you might not see the negative effects straight away, but over time you can go into chronic deficiency, and then it can be too late when your horse does get sick.
Well, we do get those phone calls sometimes, unfortunately, from whether it's sort of clients that have had that horse for a longer time not knowing, or they've bought a horse, or they've inherited a horse that's got cracked hooves, and we sort of ask, well, what's the diet been, or what was it on previously with the previous owner? And 9 times out of 10, there has been obviously minerals more so that have been shortchanged, and now we've that new owner has inherited that problem. We can fix it, but it's not going to take a week or 2 weeks. It might be 6 to 9 months before you see that hoof fully regrow and be healthy.
Yeah, the sickness and conditions can be avoided through this consistent feeding of a balanced diet with your horse. We have control of what's going in their mouths, so I think it's our duty that we really look and have a reason for each part of the feed that's going in. And the CEN Grain Free Ultimate is the perfect base for all horses and can be adapted in that way.
I think also I'd like to mention, because we use obviously the faba bean hull and the kernel, we don't have the fluctuations in seasonal ingredients like some of the other companies obviously go through. And look, we get feedback that whether they've been on another feed and it changes every batch, or it changes every month or 2 months, because they've got 10 or 15 different raw ingredients. So if something's out of stock, or if something is expensive, or if something needs to be adapted, they can legally do it, and it's absolutely fine. But us only using really one ingredient, we can maintain the same consistency of the product pretty much 12 months of the year. So you don't need to worry that you may get a barley instead of a mill run or something, with some of these other feeds, and that might be the difference to tip your horse over, or it might not, like the new feed, palatability might change. So I think consistency is key, and there's nothing worse, I think, than trying to balance a diet, and then every batch that you get of a new feed, it's a different smell, it's a different look, it's a different taste, and it's like, you're going to change your diet every month as well to try to balance those ingredients?
Yeah, and it actually brings up a good point there, Pete, because when you do change ingredients in a horse's diet, particularly hay batches, it does take the microbes in their hindgut 2 to 3 weeks to adapt. So you might see changes in a horse if you're not using a consistent feed or consistent batch of hay. Those microbes have to get really used to that new profile going in. And if your horse is under stress or a little bit of pressure in performance, it could nearly make or break them at that time.
This is why when we do a diet transition, we ask to be minimum of 7 days, 10 days, sometimes even 2 weeks, because the worse the horse is, obviously, the longer it's going to take. So going slow and steady, obviously, for those new microbes to adjust to the new feed, to the new minerals, to the new vitamins, takes a bit of time, as Brian mentioned. So there's no ribbons for sort of finishing first in 1 or 2 days. So slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, and I think another point to add with the CEN Grain Free Ultimate, the supply, we're actually nearly made to order. Even take one example, the New Zealand export that we do, it's made fresh and then sent.
Yes, so none of our batches that we make get left in a warehouse sitting around, and then obviously it gets pulled when a distributor needs it, or whether it's someone in New Zealand. So every order that we do, and it's either going to be in a 22 ton or a 34 ton, the purchase order comes through, it gets made fresh, and then within 2 or 3 days of the product being made, it gets distributed, obviously, like around Australia. So people that are using our product will see the long best before dates, it's 12 months. And that's because you're literally getting a product that's made today. And by the time, the store gets it, it might be, I'm not saying, these other feeds sit around a warehouse for 3 months to 6 months, but that's something that we certainly don't do. So everything does get made pretty much fresh. So that the product you get.
Yeah, we might be relabeled the fresh food people.
I like that one, Brian.
Because I think, we would have the freshest feed on the market, because it's not waiting in warehouses for months, even 6 months to be picked. We're getting it really to market probably fresher than most companies.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And the other problem we don't have is the weevils problem. You know, the rodents absolutely hate our product, and that's a good thing because a lot of them go for the sugar, you know, go for the starchy feeds, go for the stuff that really tastes really sweet. So we're proud of that. We don't have much stock loss because obviously, you know, the rodents don't go for it. But having the low sugar, low starch, but still having palatability, and we get the palatability through the kernels at a specific amount. So it's a balancing act because you got to keep the sugar low, you got to keep the starch low, but not too low. But then the lower sugar you go, the lower starch you go, the less palatable it is. So it's a balancing act. But from the feedback that we're getting at the moment is that we're not having absolutely no issues with palatability.
Yeah, it's been very, very popular, and with some parts of Australia selling out, but we can assure you all our supply is really good with our raw ingredients, and it's just that comes down to logistics sometimes. And can it get any better, Pete, this pellet? I'll give you another aspect of why this CEN Grain Free Ultimate is, and it doesn't contain an oil. So one thing that sets us apart is that our feed is made without an oil, which when you form it, it does undergo heat. So when you think about it, an oil being heated would go rancid, or an oil sitting around in a warehouse for 6 months, you'd smell a bit of rancidity. So that's not good for the horse. And that's what we pride ourselves with, not putting an oil inside our feed.
Yeah, look, a lot of companies use the oil during manufacturing to help bind the pellet to obviously avoid crumble and dust and everything like that. So it's actually very difficult to form a pellet without oil or molasses. So both, we don't use oil or molasses. So we're pretty proud that we do get a pellet that's palatable, but it also is not very dusty. There's not much crumble in there. And we managed to do it just using a steam press technology. So as Brian mentioned, it's like me sort of, deep frying my chips and instead of chucking that oil out, I'm going to sprinkle that oil over my Caesar salad. We don't do it because that's just putrid. It's rancid. It's going to make us sick. But yet that's almost what's happening. Maybe not to that extreme, but chances are that oil inside any other company's pellet would be rancid to some degree. And then the horse has got to use energy to try to detox itself almost to get rid of those free radicals that are inside that product. So, I'd rather be having my horse, using that energy to build top line and muscle, performance than trying to fix itself from possibly a product that's had an oil through it that's rancid and detoxing itself.
Yeah, there's no reason to have it in there because we want a pure, clean ingredient profile, and that's what we have. Because if we put it in there, we're actually shortchanging the next part of this diet program, which is adding a good source of omega-3 with the CEN oil. So going back to the CEN Grain Free Ultimate, by not having that oil inside the feed, you're supplying the horse with a cleaner ingredient list, which, as Peter said, you're not using up your antioxidant load that's meant for muscle recovery, especially in performance, but also other parts of the body requires vitamin E, vitamin C, and it shouldn't be used up when you're feeding a feed that contains an oil, because this is a consistent amount going into them every single day. You're feeding your horse every single day an inferior product. It's only a matter of time that this can catch up if the horse is under stress or a little bit fatigued.
Well, Brian, I mean, a prime example can be you've got an apple, you take a bite out of it, you leave it for 4 hours, it goes brown. Yeah. That's oxidation. That's the apple starting to go red. It's the same you can do with a banana. You get a banana, most of them are frozen when you get it, they're nice and green. Give it 4 days and it's sort of rotten brown, So, but that's a natural process. So the same thing is happening in those feeds that actually do have an oil through them. From what I understand, they add the oil for obviously for the binding of the pellets, but also for digestible energy. So oil is very high in energy. So when some companies do add an oil into their feed, it brings up the digestible energy. So on paper, it looks like a very high digestible product, but yet you got to look at the consequences if that oil is rancid.
Yeah, the devil's in the detail. And I think with human health progressing, you've probably seen a big switch out from the seed oils, and that's not switching out the linseed or flaxseed oils, which is the human grade high omega-3 version. We're actually all switching off the rice bran, canola, soy, even the corn oil, and also sunflower oil. So the reason for this is they're all high in omega-6, or they have a ratio that is higher in omega-6 than omega-3. And this is the opposite to pasture, which is high in omega-3 to omega-6. And that's what horses naturally evolved on. And that's what we're trying to replicate in the domestic setting through a balanced diet program that incorporates our products.
And this is why we recommend that the CEN oil gets added into the feed daily, not put into a plastic bag and sort of gets, left sitting around sort of for 3-4 days. That's a natural oxidation process, so we try to avoid that. It is a bit of a pain in the bum to obviously to add an oil into feed every single day, but, in my opinion, is you can't put a price on your health or your horse's health.
Well, it makes sense with the nourishment for your horse and the viable fat source, which is high omega-3, going in, so it's actually utilized. And before we move to what add-ons you need for your roughage and your CEN Grain-Free Ultimate, there's a few final parts to this. So when you look at the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate, it supports the gut, top line, and calm energy all in one. So looking at the performance horse, it is really excellent for this. The amino acid profile in the fava beans support muscle protein synthesis, especially lysine and threonine, which are essential for top line and immune system repair. And when you look at how the fava bean hull, it increases butyrate production, which can really help the colon cells and reduce inflammation in the gut lining. So we're all geared to a hindgut health. It also has a type of starch, which is resistant starch, which doesn't cause insulin spikes. It actually helps the hindgut and nourish the microbes in there as like a prebiotic. There is a popular product based on green bananas that does a similar thing, but we've got this in the feed. So if you're feeding that, you might be doubling up as well with those amounts. So before we move on to what you need to add to the roughage source and this single hard feed, was there anything else, Pete?
No, Brian, I think you've covered everything.
Yeah, and I think when we look at, we'll call these the core add-ons, so what is essential, and we'll start with salt. So salt needs to be added to this, and salt should be added to all diets on top of, regardless of what hard feed you're feeding, because a horse approximately requires 25 grams of sodium and chloride just to exist with their body systems, the fluids. Even the stomach acid is made out of chloride, so it's hydrochloric acid. So you need that salt going in. And we recommend 10 to 15 grams per 100 kg body weight per day. Average horse, 40 to 50 grams of salt going in. It's really there to activate their thirst reflex, helps hydrate that digestive tract to lower colic risk, particularly through winter, and it should be fed all year round.
Yeah, look, some companies do put salt in their feeds. We put a little bit, obviously, but not enough to maintain those levels, because if you put too much salt in your feed, you make your feed unpalatable, because obviously salt isn't the most palatable thing you can feed to yourself or to your horse. So salt really does need to be given daily. We've got a macrobiotic salt which does have the 78 minerals through it. It's a food grade salt. It's a lake salt that doesn't have any microplastics, nothing like that. Very clean, unrefined. If you give a base salt, as Brian mentioned, 10 to 15 grams to 200 kilograms, you're also going to be activating those thirst receptors for your horse, and your horse does need 40 to 50% of water inside the cell to maintain hydration. So if you've just got the water outside the cell, you're actually going to be washing away all the minerals that you're getting from the grain-free ultimate. So you're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. So it's important to have the water inside the cell and outside the cell, and that's what our salt does.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense when you look at how the profile of sweat is. So it's all sodium, potassium, chloride, and calcium, and a little bit of magnesium. So if you look at your hay or your roughage portion, that's supplying enough potassium. So what else do we need? We need sodium and chloride and calcium, which is coming from the salt and the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're just really plugging in those puzzle pieces, and feeding this consistently is going to really give a good base to your horse's diet.
Look, if you've got a horse that you're going out there maybe twice a week, and it's going to be middle of summer, the CEN electrolyte's obviously great after that workout or after that event or after that ride, just to obviously top up what you've lost with the sweat on top of the salt. Brian mentioned the CEN oil, obviously, that's for the omega-3, keeping good gut health, obviously shiny coat. They do get, omega-3 out of grass. Depending on what your grass is, you may need less CEN oil, you may not need any, but we haven't really seen, 10 out of 10 pasture analysis, have we?
No. Sometimes when you look at your pasture, it's really good to top up that omega-3 with the CEN oil, and you can really look at this being that next step. So this step 4, the two important add-ons to the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate and your roughage is salt and CEN oil, and they're there to really replace what is deficient in those other two parts and really completes that puzzle picture, because 9 times out of 10 your horse will probably thrive on this, but then when you put them through additional stress in performance, they may need that extra support in an electrolyte because they're sweating too much, or a digestive support because their hindgut can be really prone to being affected by stress in travel, performance, and then this can lead to poor behavior as well because of that gut-brain connection. So feeding the CEN Extra Balance, which is our digestive support, can be a really good, inexpensive way to help that environment.
We do get quite often people that obviously book in a free diet consult that have a diet that's unbalanced, and they're clever enough to know there's a problem with the gut, whether like the stools are loose or whether the horse is girthy, or the symptoms there that there's something not right in the gut. So they'll reach out for a gut supplement, whether it's ours or another brand. So you can see the symptom and then you're trying to treat the symptom. But if you don't get to the root cause of the problem, which is an unbalanced diet, that supplement's only going to work so far. So our theory is, well, if you balance your diet and then you want an even better support, so the actual extra balance then would be with a balanced diet. So you're going to have that gut in optimum health for, so your horse doesn't get sick, you don't get bacterial infections, you don't get viral infections. For performance, the stresses, you're gonna get more longevity out of your horse. You're gonna get a better performance because the horse is running on 6 cylinders, not 4 cylinders.
Yeah, 100%, Peter. The energy systems is going to be very efficient when you're basing it all around that hindgut and not the small intestine, which is where the sugar and starch is digested, and that's a very small part of the horse's whole digestive tract. So you're just gearing it towards what the horse is naturally fueled on in this very simple diet.
If you get, and also the last part there, we mentioned was obviously sodium, salt drives thirst and activates those thirst receptors. When you get a horse that's drinking a lot of water, 9 times out of 10, they're probably not getting enough salt in the diet. Some horses sweat profusely as well. Most of them don't get enough salt in the diet as well. And be careful with the table salts too. A lot of those are refined. They're chemically processed. They'll be like 99.999% sodium chloride. That means that, the minerals that we mentioned previously have been bleached out of them. So you're only really feeding sodium chloride, which is important, but you need the other minerals as well.
Our macrobiotic salt really aligns with our pure way of feeding and that naturalness, because what we do see around, and it is your choice at the end of the day if you want to feed a pool salt, but walk into a pool store and ask, can I feed this to my horse? And I'd like to hear them recommend to feed it to your horse, because many are industrial process. They may have an impurity there that shouldn't be there, and you're just playing with fire because it's meant for your pool and not for your horse. And it could void some insurances because you've fed a feed product that is not intended for a horse.
Does that mean, Brian, I need to stop putting a pool salt on my steaks?
No comment.
Just joking. I'd never in the world do that. It's a bad joke.
That is good.
So I think that covers step 4, Brian. Let's jump on to step 5, the 4-week program.
Yeah, so what we're going to go through here is, we call it the 4-week program, and that's how to transition to our diet, which centers around the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate, nice and slowly, so it doesn't upset the microbes in the hindgut, which takes around that 14 to 21 days to adapt to the new feed source, especially if you're not feeding high fiber at the moment.
Yep.
And Peter will outline the exact amounts you can use for the old to the new feed transition.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, Brian, it's a 4-week program. So in the first sort of 7 to 14 days, which will be the 2 weeks, you want to start introducing the new feed slowly, and that may be 100 grams, it may be 200 grams. It all depends on how fussy or picky your horse is. 9 horses out of 10, absolutely fine with 200, 250 grams on day 1. And then what you want to do is, if you're going to add 250 grams of the Grain-Free Ultimate on day 1, you want to reduce your old feed by 250 grams. So we're keeping the volume of the feed pretty much the same, but we're taking away the old feed by a set amount, and we're introducing the new feed at a set amount. And that may go, depending on the volume of feed, that may take 7 days, 10 days, 14 days. So the transition part is the most critical. As we mentioned previously, the gut microbes there are getting used to when you feed. There's changes going on. There's a bit of shock to the system. There's microbes there that are craving the sugar that the horse may have previously been on. So there's a lot going on that the owner can't see, but it's all going on for the health of the horse. So this part is the most critical. We got to take nice and slow. If the horse, eats 200 grams or 250, and then you go up to 500 and starts leaving some of the grain free, that's an indication that you're going too quick. So then we got to back it up again and maybe go, instead of half a kilo, you'll drop it back to 300 grams, and then we'll go to 400 grams the next day, and then we might have to go 500 grams. So depending on your horse, you will work it out. And the goal is to get it to eat the new feed, whatever amount you give, and then the next day you slowly increase. So as we mentioned, very critical. You only want to start adding different powders, different supplements, even possibly the oil after week 2. I don't like adding everything at week 1 because the horse is like, all right, I'm going to be detoxing from the old diet to a new diet, and now I've got to handle a new supplement. Now I've got to handle an oil that I've never had. I've got to handle possibly salt for the first time that I've never had. That's a big shock to the system. So the way that I like to recommend it, and I'm sure Bryan agrees, is get the horse to eat the feed. Then we introduce the oil, and we start doing the salt slowly. And if we look at what the goal is for the horse to be finishing its food daily.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Pete. If you got your old feed bag there, you don't have to throw it out. You can mix it in with the CEN Grain Free Ultimate. It'll mix well. The horse will be still getting that same taste profile. And as Pete said, edge up the percentages of the new feed over time so there's no shock to that system.
We've had some customers go cold turkey and they've been absolutely fine as well. If you might be feeding a high fiber feed that doesn't have any vitamins and minerals, or that has very low vitamins and minerals. So when you do transition from possibly your beet pulp to our grain-free ultimate, you can do it very easy. You only may need 5 days or 7 days because it's still high fiber, both feeds. So you're not going from a high sugar starch feed to a low sugar starch feed. You're going from a high fiber to a higher fiber feed, just with vitamins and minerals.
Yeah, that's well said, Pete. And what we see in those first 2, 3, 4 weeks is you'll see the response, particularly in the manure, sometimes in the skin and coat first as well. And you won't see the effect in the hoof health for months. And possibly some of the muscle health, depending on the work, you might see it within that first month. But what you're looking for after that 2, 3, 4 weeks is monitoring the response in the condition of your horse to see if you need to make a further adjustment on top. And as Pete said, that could be the perfect time to introduce a supplement, even the CEN oil at that time, which is going to give more calories, but in a cool way because it's no sugar, no starch. And that'll add to the overall calorie load of your horse. So
with a 4-week program, what our goal is obviously is to transition a horse from the old diet to the new diet. So the results that you're going to see are probably going to come after week 2, possibly in week 3, week 4. Some people do see results in day 1, and the results you may see that are different. If you're going from a high sugar, high starch diet to a low sugar, low starch diet, you're going to see temperament improvements, okay? You're going to see the horse willing and wanting to do the work. And that could be a horse that's a little bit off its face, pulling and reefing and tearing and on edge, become calm. Or you could have a horse that you actually have to force to do the work, now wanting to do the work, because you're not going to be running the horse off sugar and starch. When you give, lollies and sort of cordial to kids where they bounce off the walls and then they, come crashing down and they want to sleep. It's the same to a horse, because end of the day, a horse is a vegetarian, okay? They're a fiber fermenter. They're designed to run off fiber and fat. They're not designed to be fed or run off sugar and starch. On the performance side, absolutely, we need some sugar and starch there to replenish and top up the glycogen stores, which they need for that anaerobic muscle activity. But if you've got a horse that you're working once a week or twice a week, those glycogen stores are probably not even getting touched up at all. So the last thing you want is to be having that horse on a high sugar, high starch diet when you're riding it once a week.
Yeah, no, 100%, Pete. When we look at how that diet makeup is, our goal is to have it balanced, and we're not going to see full results until that 6 week to 8 week where it's all flushed through their system, the new feed is working, and you're going to see where your horse levels out there. And as we know that every horse is individual, you may have to adjust the feed rate down because they're doing too well, because their hindgut is absorbing the nutrients really well, or you might have to add something further because you've increased your workload or you need a condition increase.
Absolutely, and that's something that we do on those one-on-one diet consults. We like people to recheck in, whether it's a couple of months down the track or when something changes. If you're bringing a horse that's been in a paddock for 6 months and you're going to start putting it into work, obviously, we got to make sure that it's the right amount of calories for the right amount of work. The horse doesn't get muscle sore and so forth. But one point I'd like to make is too, I'm still getting a lot of people that are rugging horses. Okay, I know in some parts of Australia it's still a little bit cool. Where we are in Queensland, especially up North Queensland, can get very hot and very humid. And I had a lady call me yesterday back because I did ask her to follow up in 10 to 14 days' time. I won't mention her name, but the first thing that she said on the phone, she said, "Peter, you are right." I said, "Right in what?" She said, "You asked me to take the rugs off, and the horses have just gone to another level." So what was happening in that case is we can give it all the healthiest food on earth, but if the horse is out in the sun, obviously it needs to have a shelter under a tree, but if the horse is out in the sun at 30 degrees, it's rugged, it's eating all this healthy food, all it's going to be doing is it's going to be sweating and it's going to be dehydrating. So everything that the horse is eating, it's sweating out, and you're rubbing Peter to pay Paul. So you're not actually getting the benefits out of it visible, where when she took those rugs off, and look, she's a little bit apprehensive. So I just said, look, you don't need to worry. As long as they've got trees, they've got shelter that they can go under, and they're smart enough to know when they're hot. It's like us, like we're not going to go in tracksuit pants and a jacket or a jumper out in the middle of summer to the beach, are we? So we know, and a horse is the same. They know when it's hot. So if they've got shelter there that they could go under, whether it's trees or a man-made shelter, they will go there, and then they'll go out in the sun where they need to. So by simply making a change, we took the rugs off, 10 days later, 14 days later, called back, like she couldn't believe, the horses put weight on, their shine came through, and their demeanour changed as well.
Yeah, that's remarkable, Pete, but unremarkable at the same time, because horse ownership is all about consistency, care and attention, and nutrition is one puzzle piece that we tick off. But as Pete said, if you don't have that management right, all the right nutrition in the world could be undone, and then we start chasing our tail when there's something environmental going on, such as over-rugging. And
this is the reason why we do the podcast. It's not to sort of point fingers at anyone. It's to get the information out there, but also give reasons why we do it, rather than telling someone, "Oh, you need to not rug." Well, people are going to say, "Well, yeah, why not?" But if there's no valid reason why, obviously we explain why. So it's just going back to nature. Not everywhere is going to be 30 degrees, and with the thermal neutral zone that I think Brian's mentioned on a previous podcast, horses do feel the cold and the hot different to us humans.
Oh, 100%. When we feel the cold, it is not necessarily that they feel the cold, because their bottom of their range of their thermal neutral zone is below that 5 degrees, whereas we're around that 20 degrees when we feel cold. So then it's really important, and we can't stress it enough, even over summer, that you just take those rugs off, because it's just going to play all sorts of havoc with their body systems inside. Yeah, so now I think we can take an overview look at this, because we do have other podcasts that show you when you should be feeding your hay before work, other tips and tricks around feeding. But this podcast is about to give you those basic foundations that can apply to all horses and the way to feed them. And I hope you guys have taken some little parts of this, or even the whole lot, and you might be interested in getting a free diet analysis through us, which is a complimentary service we do. And we're doing 60, 70, 80 a month, and we're well versed and seeing the pulse of the industry. Peter, myself, and Angelique really deep dive your horse's individual needs to then achieve the goals that you want going forward. And Pete, do you have anything to add?
Yep, Brian, I do. So basically our products are available Australia-wide through numerous distributors. So your store, your local store, even they may not have the product on the shelf, they do have access to our product from their local distributor. So it's simply you asking them to possibly get that product in for you. For the online shoppers, we've got Pet Circle as well. So they're carrying the full range. They do offer free delivery to certain postcodes around Australia. So if for some reason your store doesn't want to get the product in, or it's too hard, have a look online. They do freight the grain-free ultimate as well to certain postcodes.
Yeah, the hard feed's a massive one, and it just helps everyone. I know for me, we're time poor, and running around traffic these days, we've got to save time and money, and that's a great service that they provide. So we've got a lot of options Australia-wide, and if you're an international listener, who knows, we could be coming to your country next, because it's been really well received in New Zealand. And if you are, just reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've still got I think we're at 134 5-star reviews, so we're trying to hit 150 before Christmas. So look, guys, if you enjoyed this podcast, please give us the 5-star review. It helps with our ranking. I think we're over 130,000 listens now, I think Australia-wide and internationally.
And if you made it this far through this podcast and you're on Facebook, we have a good CEN users group, which is a place where you can show off your CEN results or ask questions. And also, if you do have a quick question or want some quick advice, you can easily just call our office number. And I think that's pretty rare these days that you can actually talk to a human and not an AI.
Well, I think it's pretty rare because we do have a phone number, which is rare. We do answer the phone, and it's either myself, yourself, or Angelique. And yeah, you don't need to book a diet consult if you've got like a 1 or 2 or 3 sort of questions that you want to just knock on the head quick.
Yep. No, so I think that about rounds this one out. Pete, I think it's not beer o'clock because the hiatus continues.
I think I need a cat nap, Brian. This one's gone on for a little while.
It has. No, all good. So, we'll be back with another podcast really soon, guys, and thanks for all your support with everything.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.